In this video, we will see how to apply slopes to floor slabs by using the shape editing tools. We'll see how to add split lines and points to the floors to help modify the shape. And we'll also see how to assign variable thickness to a layer within the floor assembly and how that affects the shape edited floor. I have the exercise file floor shape editing open. And zooming in to the end of the site, we can see that we have the roadway coming away from the building, and we also have a change in level, and the road needs to slope down to the lower level to accommodate this. I'll select the road, and looking at the type selector here, we can see that it's been created using the floor, and it's of the type Site Road. Coming over to the Modify Floors ribbon tab, we can see we have a panel for shape editing, and we will use these tools to create the slope required in the roadway. I'll click the Modify Sub-Elements tool, and now looking at the floor, we can see that we have access to the vertex and edges that make up the floor. And if I pick one of the vertex or edges, we can see that we have controls that will allow us to drag it up or down, and we also have a temporary dimension that we could type in a distance. And this distance would represent the height offset from the host level of the floor, and could be a negative distance to move that edge down. Looking back at the shape editing tools, we have tools here to add points and split lines. So I'll click the Add Point tool, and now we can see as we go over the surface of the floor, we could add a vertex into the middle of that surface, or equally we could snap to the edge of the floor and add a vertex point in there too. I'll click to add this point in on the edge of the floor. And now I'll go back to the Modify Floors ribbon and we'll click the Modify Sub-Elements tool. Now we can see that we can select the point that we've just added, and then we can use the controls here to drag this up and change the shape of the floor. And we can see that that's created some quite extreme slopes within the floor. And we have a warning here letting us know that the thickness of the floor might be inaccurate due to those extreme slopes that we've just created. So as this shape now doesn't really suit our requirements, if we go back to the Modify Floors ribbon tab, we can see we have the option now to reset the shape. So I'll click this, and any modifications that we've made, including adding points and split lines, will be discarded and the floor returned to its original shape. To create the slope in the road, we will add in two split lines, one at the beginning of the slope and one at the bottom of the slope. Adding split lines that span across the width of the road will make it easier, as we will only need to modify the split lines rather than lots of individual points. It will be easier to draw these split lines accurately in a plan view, so from the project browser we'll open up the Site Floor Plan view. And now zooming into the road at the end here, we can see we have the edges on the walls at the beginning and at the end of the slope, and we can use these to snap and align the split lines too. So with the roadway still selected, we'll go to the Modify Floors ribbon tab, and from the Shape Editing panel we'll click the Add Split Line tool. Now zooming in a little, we can snap to the end of the wall at the top of the slope here, and then moving across to the other side we can snap to the intersection on the opposite edge of the floor. So now we'll move down to the bottom of the ramp, and again zooming in we can see the edge of the wall that we need to align to. So we'll click on here, and then again across to the other side we can snap to the intersection on the opposite edge of the floor. So now that's added those split lines in, we'll swap back to the 3D view, and we can see those split lines on the floor ready for us to edit them. So now I'll go back to the Modify Floors ribbon tab, and we'll click on the Modify Sub-Elements tool. The split line at the top of the slope we don't actually need to edit, as it's at the correct height, and this will just provide the location for where the floor will start to slope. So actually we'll go to the end of the ramp here and we'll click on the edge. And now we can see that we have the controls to drag this end down. So let's use these, and we'll snap to the floor that's at the correct level just next to it here. And we can see that that will now bring the end of the ramp down to meet that, which is at the street level that we require. Looking at temporary dimension, we can see that's got a value of -8 feet, so we will use this value for the other split line too. But before we do that, we can see that we have a warning here, and again this is letting us know that due to the steep slope that we've just added to this floor, the cross section of it may not be accurate to the floor's makeup, but we can ignore this as it will resolve itself when we edit the next split line. So now I'll select this split line, and this time I'll edit the temporary dimension. Currently it's set to 0, so we'll type this in to be -8 feet. And then once we've entered that value, it will move down by 8 feet from the highest level of the floor and align with the bottom of the ramp as we need it. So we don't need to make any more changes, so I'll click Modify to finish editing the floor. And now that we can see we have our roadway sloping down to the lower street level as we need it. Panning across to where the stairs are coming down to the lower level, we need to add a ramp in next to the stairs to make the building more accessible. So we'll use a floor tool to create the ramp, and it will be easier to do this in the plan view again. So I'll swap back to the site floor plan view. And now from the architecture ribbon tab on the build panel, we'll click the floor tool. Looking at the type selector, we'll change this to be the site paving type of floor. Now to sketch in the ramp, I'll go to the draw tools on the create floor boundary ribbon, and it's currently set to pick walls, so I'll change this to the pick lines tool. And now moving down into the area where we need to create the ramp, we can click on the edges of the floors that are already there to trace around their boundary, which will coincide with the boundary of the ramp. So once we've got all 4 of those created, we will need to trim off the edges. So from the Modify ribbon on the Modify panel, we'll choose the Trim Extend to Corner tool. And now we can just work our way around all 4 corners here to create that enclosed boundary that we need. So having got that enclosed boundary, we'll click Finish Edit Mode. And we can see that we're being asked about attaching to floor. And do we want walls that go up to this floor's level to be attached to its bottom? So we'll click Don't Attach. And we've got this message because we're at the site level. And we need this to be down at the street level. So with the floor still selected, we'll go to the Properties palette. And from the Constraints panel here, we'll change the level from site to street level. So having completed the floor, we'll swap back to the 3D view, and there we can see the floor down at the street level, and we can see at the end here we need to change the height of this to go up to the floor at the top here. So to do this, with the floor selected, we'll go to the Modify Floors ribbon tab, and from the Shape Editing panel we'll click Modify Sub-Elements, and then we can just click this end of the floor here and then go to the options bar here, and we'll just type in the elevation to be 8 feet. And then once we apply this, we can see that raise up to meet the floor at the top here, and it's sloping down there to the bottom to create the ramp. We can see that we have a gap underneath the ramp, and we would like this to be filled in. And to do this, we'll create a new floor type with a variable layer. But first, let's look at the ramping section. So from the project browser, we'll open up the view section 5, as this section goes through the location of the ramp. And here we can now see the floor sloping down with the gap underneath this. So to make the new floor type, with the floor selected, we'll go to the Properties palette and click Edit Type. At the top of the type properties, we'll click Duplicate to make a new type, and we'll name this Site Paving Ramp. And then click OK to accept that new name and create that new type. So we need to edit the structure, so from the construction panel we'll click the edit button next to the structure parameter. So we can see we have the one layer of the site paving here, and we need to add another layer in. So from the bottom of the assembly here we'll click Insert, and that will add the new layer at the bottom. So we'll click the up button to move it above the core boundary. Now let's change the thickness to 1 foot. And now we need to assign a material, so we'll click by category and then open the material browser from the ellipsis button that appears. At the top of the material browser we'll search for concrete materials, And then from the results, we'll choose the concrete cast in place grey material to assign that onto our new layer. Now I won't make this a variable layer just yet, we'll just see what happens first. So we'll click OK to save this and OK again to apply that onto the floor. And zooming in, we can see now that we have our new floor type with the paving layer at the top and then the 1 foot concrete layer beneath that. And we can see that it's also of a consistent thickness as it slopes up the ramp. So I'll select the ramp and then from the properties palette we'll click edit type to access its type properties. And then again we'll click the edit button next to structure to access the assembly. Now looking at the layers, we have the concrete layer at the bottom and then we have the variable thickness column, and we just need to check that for the concrete layer here, and then we can click OK to save this change and then click OK once again to apply that to the floor. And straight away we can see that concrete layer is now going down to the bottom of the ramp, with its thickness varying now to fill up the extra 8 feet of height that we added to the top of the ramp. And swapping back to the 3D view, we can now see that that gap under the ramp has been filled in by the variable thickness concrete layer. And that now completes the creation of the ramp between the levels.